want to settle and talk a little bit about a debate that a lot of metalheads have and a lot of punk fans have. Is hardcore metal? The simple answer is no. No, it is not. What I don't personally understand about this discussion and discourse is you are taking away from metal and from punk if you try to lump the two in with each other. Now, is that to say that there aren't metal subgenres that are heavily influenced by punk or mixed with punk? Absolutely not. Metalcore is literally one half hardcore punk, and that's what makes it metalcore music. It's mixed with heavy metal. But I think that you are kind of taking away from the hallmark of what punk represents and what metal represents, and I don't think that you need to separate the two to try to meet some sort of like lumping in to have some universal definition. Genres exist for a reason, and you can argue as much as you want that like a bunch of subgenres shouldn't exist, and I perfectly understand why you might hold that stance or why you think that all the little micro genres and micro labels are reductive and redundant and don't have any sort of purpose of being in music, period. That is perfectly valid, but I think that throughout time, with people arguing whether or not punk and specifically hardcore punk are metal, I don't really see the point in doing that, and I only think it sets both genres back a lot. I think where kind of the confusion happens is because there are some hardcore punk bands that are incredibly metallic or metal influenced, and there are a ton of metal bands that are incredibly punk and hardcore influenced. You get a band burst on the scene like Knocked Loose who are unapologetically metalcore, but you also get people calling them hardcore punk and beatdown hardcore, and so people automatically feel like all things that are hardcore punk are automatically metal. But if you go back to like the 80s and the 90s and you look at a lot of like early post-hardcore music, if you're looking at like the Fugazis and the Page 99 and Orchids, early screamo music, which also was derived a lot from punk, emo music and that sort of thing, these bands probably would not want to be called metal and would not have a place at the table with metal. Do the two have overlap in their cultures? Absolutely. But I went into a whole thing recently about how metalheads and punk fans are most of the time pretty fucking different in their approaches of how they view music, how they view the world, how they view politics, and the overlap isn't necessarily what you think it might be. And in an attempt to kind of eradicate the necessity for a lot of different subgenres and labels and stuff, people try to just lump in punk with metal, but there are a lot of differences, both like musically but also culturally, and that matters a lot to a genre, considering if we're going to define certain genres just by their aesthetic or look at like glam metal or porno grind or pirate metal or Viking metal. You see these things that are heavily influenced by their lyrical themes, by the way that people dress, by specific ways that aesthetics are used and toyed around with on, album covers and stuff. If we're going to define things by aesthetic and lyric just as much as music itself, I feel like music should be held way above all of the rest, because at the end of the day, the art form is music. And while punk and metal might have risen around the same time or found their infancy at the same time or had some sort of overlap and crossover appeal, they went in two entirely different directions culturally, and the significance of what they stood for and the rebellion of what they stood for. With metalheads typically being more introverted, being more black sheeps of society, being more outcasts and enraged, whereas punk people tended to be more revolutionary. They wanted to see a change in the establishment. They wanted to see a change in the world, and they were willing to do things that were provocative to really elicit that. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing for people to want there to be overlap. I personally have a lot of overlap with both of them. With that being said, I think you are taking away a lot from both if you try to just push them and squeeze them together. It's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It's not like you're trying to segregate them. It's just that they are two very different things. And that's why a lot of like metalheads just don't like when punk is lumped in with metal, and why a lot of hardcore punk fans do not want to see it lumped in with metal. And punk's its own story. I don't think a lot of people think that classic punk overlaps with metal, but it very much is hardcore punk, especially considering in the 2000s and 2010s, the waters got a little muddied and confusing, and it got a little blurry and hazy because you saw a lot of these metalcore bands that were very metal based being very punk based as well, and they were being considered metal, and so people just wanted to throw in the towel and say, well, then it's all fucking metal if we're going to change it. But there are still tons of hardcore punk bands that just maintain from their tradition. And most of the time, you gotta understand that metalcore bands, even though they are considered one half metal, one half hardcore punk, most of the time err much more on the side of metal as opposed to punk. Metalcore has changed a lot throughout time, and it's leaned more into metalcore and breakdowns and screamed vocals and that sort of thing than punk, and a lot of the lyrical values don't really align much with punk. And yes, while we are at it, just to end this video off, emo and screamo are not metal either. Neither is post-hardcore. What are your guys' opinions of this? You can let me know down in the comment section below. If you disagree, you can. There is no wrong answer. Be sure to let me know. We can discuss it. Have a nice little fun chat. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.